Hello, Learn 11 class. We're back for video 2 of study reading. This is the final video for study reading this module. For this video, you will need something to take notes with, and you will also need your textbook in case you want to follow along in chapter 4, because I will be going over some of the main highlights and points of chapter 4. And the activity that we're going to do is directly in the lecture, so let's get started. All right, so first I want to talk about some of the roadblocks that we may have to reading. It's good to sit down and create a list of all the things that get in our way of blocking us from focusing while we're reading. And for each person, it's going to be different, but what we're going to find is that there's a lot of crossover between all of us because we all kind of have very similar lives. I mean, one student may not have children and another one might, but one of them may have, siblings, and it's a really similar interruption, and we all have busy lives. So it would be nice if you began this lecture by pausing and making a list of reasons that you're blocked from focusing in on your reading. Like if you can think back to some of the scenarios you've had. Either way, we're going to continue here. So one roadblock to reading that's mentioned in your book is just being able to find the time to read an entire article or a chapter or a book. And believe me, I was an English major. I had to read. So I understand not only reading something, that's I understand, but also trying to read really dense, complicated material and having a time limit on it is really, challenging for many people. So one of the things you can do is break up the readings, like chunk the readings. We talked about that in phase 2 of muscle reading. So remember that that's an option, to chunk up the reading so that you don't have to read all at once a really long article. And so use your time management skills and apply that to your reading. Maybe turning off interruptions when you can. I'm not talking about emergencies, but making sure that your electronics isn't going to interrupt you as you're reading. And planning for some quiet time, which means if you're using your time management calendars wisely, you can see, if you're planning ahead, what weeks are going to be busier and what weeks are looking a little bit freer. And that way you can get a head start on some of that reading to prepare for those weeks that you have less time. When we're focusing and trying to stay motivated as readers, we again want to use that skill and the idea of pacing ourselves to slow down and use our intention to make sure that we have planned and are willing to listen and interact with the text, even when we don't like it. We just have to get on it and begin reading at some point so that it's not, we're not cramming. And once we're cramming, we're not even taking in the most important information anyway. We're just sort of skimming and hoping for the best. And you can return to some of the other lessons earlier in the semester to look for other ways that we've talked about motivation and staying engaged a lot this semester. We've also talked about attitude and how that plays a part in blocking ourselves from sitting through a whole reading or sitting through a class, whatever it may be. And then with difficult text, some of the things that we can do, we can, of course, use the muscle reading step-by-step process, but we can teach ourselves. So if we're having a really difficult time understanding a reading, we use all the resources that we have at our disposal, even at home, to help us to teach ourselves what we need to learn if we're not really fully understanding a lecture or a textbook or a reading. I had to do this plenty in college. It was something that was expected of me. In fact, the instructor was like, "This is what I have for you. If you need more, you need to go find it." And no one was resentful of that. No one put up a fight. That was just kind of expected. And so we went and did our own research, and we formed study groups and tried to teach each other. Reading out loud is a really good way of helping staying focused, because hearing your own voice for whatever reason connects us to the page. And it's really hard to read out loud and then also have thoughts on top of that, or to sort of get, distracted with noise. Outlining a text is another way to stay really engaged and focused, meaning you are looking at the main ideas and the details, and you're creating an outline like we did for the note-taking module. You can ask someone to read out loud to you if you're tired, if your eyes are tired. And then you can also ask tutors for help as well. Of course, putting yourself in an environment that allows you to listen is really important too. If you need quiet, make sure you're in a quiet space. All right, when we encounter tough vocabulary, this is kind of my forte, because when I entered college, my vocabulary and understanding was very minimal. I really had to teach myself and sort of try and play catch up all the way through my undergrad, and I didn't really feel like I belonged and I knew what was going on until maybe graduate school, when other students were really talking about what was challenging for them. I used note cards, a 3x5 note card, and I would put any really difficult terms or names or dates or places that I needed to remember. And a good example of this is when I took a Vietnam War history class. There were a lot of names of places, dates, and generals, people involved in the war that I needed to remember as I was reading two different textbooks. And it was difficult for me because the names of a lot of the names were in a different language. And so I was really trying to remember and learn what those places and battles were. So I wrote everything on a note card, and I used that as a kind of bookmark. And as I read through the textbook, I used that and I would add to it. But anytime, and I'd also put the page number of the first time that I found it. So I really was building my own appendix. And I would look at the name, like if I came across a name or a date that I was unfamiliar with, I could see there on my note card where I first saw it. I'd write a couple of details for memory to help refresh my memory, and the page number so I could go back and reference that if I needed to. And this works really, really well to create your own appendix. I always had an online dictionary and the online thesaurus on my computer. Anytime I was reading, it was next to me all the time to help me with difficult words or even concepts. And I would take the vocabulary word from the dictionary that seemed appropriate for the context, like what the rest of the reading was saying, and I would put the whole definition in place of this difficult word, and I'd reread the sentence or the paragraph using that new definition to give me more information, and that was super helpful. Now, I know that when we're reading really tough articles or chapters, we may have to stop every few minutes to look up a word and do this process, and it can take us a long time, which is why chunking our readings and only reading a couple of pages at a time, or planning ahead and making sure we have plenty of time to read, is important. And then once you learn these new words, go ahead and use them. Use your new terms all the time. As you're self-testing, use as many terms as you possibly can, so that you're not only refreshing your memory, but you're deepening your comprehension of how these are used. Now, here's an activity that we can do together really quickly on looking at the context of a word to understand what the word may mean. So I'm going to ask you to read this paragraph to yourself, pause the video, read the paragraph to yourself, and the word in question is the one highlighted, seasonal variances. Come back when you're all finished. Okay, welcome back. You should have read the paragraph to yourself just to get a sense of what this word may mean. Now, we're not using the dictionary at all. We're just going to use context. So what are some keywords? We're going to look around this paragraph for some keywords. You may have seen this word shoulder season. This was a word that was unfamiliar to me, but when I looked it up, it was the definition was the time frame between when whales leave their migration and then when they return from their during their migration. So you can look that word up if you need to, but it seemed important because I didn't understand it. What about whale watching sector? You may have thought that was important. Or climate change, or maybe even impact. The word impact on climate change may have been important for you to understand both keywords, but also the ideas that are expressed. Migration seasons seems to be important, especially since it's very near the word in question. Less predictable. Whenever we see less, more, always, every, we want to pay attention to those words, right? So less predictable. And then here, this is really a really good key. When we see phrases like which would mean, or we see a word like therefore, or in other words, we may be getting close to a clue of what this word means. We may be getting a second definition, but in different words. So we want to pay attention to that as well. So based on this paragraph, what do you think seasonal variances means? Take a few minutes, pause the video, and when you're done, you can look up the word in the dictionary. My brief definition of this word is that it's the whale watching is a big business, and since climate change is affecting whale migration, the whales' migration times are changing and shifting, and so the whale watching industry may have to also shift their season, the way that they go about booking their seasonal whale watching events because of the seasonal variances, meaning the whales may migrate at different times, at different seasons. But go ahead and look up the word and see how close I am and how close you are. Okay, moving on, continuing on building vocabulary, we also want to go ahead and look at cultural context. Cultural context is the environment around whatever the topic is, our cultural surroundings. It may also be context in history, okay? So we're just looking for other information. So how do we build vocabulary and cultural context when we're going into classes or into spaces where we aren't yet experts, but we really would like to contribute, or maybe we are being forced to contribute and we don't know much about the topic and it's really challenging. So here are some ways that we can do that by watching documentaries on Netflix about the topic. There are so many to look at. I think documentaries are that and podcasts are my favorite forms of learning new information and really also deepening learning on things that I already do know. Also, YouTube is great. We have something called NBC Learn. NBC Learn is really similar to TED Ed, and they are short lessons on topics, and so you can search for the topic that you would like to learn more about. I watched one on the physics of hockey, and I thought that was really interesting to consider hockey as also a mathematics sport. Okay, also continuing on building vocabulary and context, since podcasts are one of my favorite ways to learn, I wanted to go ahead and give you some resources or some way to search for podcasts that both pique your interest, but also will continue helping you learn. And if you know what your major is, then you can listen to podcasts that have to do with your major. You can literally find a podcast for any topic or any interest, any study, anything you're studying. But just like we do with academic and non-academic sources, we want to use our judgment and look for podcasts that have some kind of value and uh, maybe reviewed knowledge. Like it's not just pop culture information, but this is really academic in some sense. And the way you can do that is by going to NPR. NPR is National Public Radio. As a college student, this was basically the only thing I listened to besides music sometimes. But really, I was always listening to public radio because it was informing me at all times of the day about topics that I needed to know in order to kind of stay focused on what I was learning in college. So you can go to NPR's website, or you can go to Google too, and you can put in the topic you're interested in and podcasts, and then go ahead and read some of the reviews. A lot of them the reviews are in iTunes. You can get a sense of what you're being offered. All of these podcasts are NPR podcasts, but they're all on different topics. If you look at this pop culture one here, Pop Culture Happy Hour is actually a couple of people who are talking about current TV shows and current events, things that are going on in our culture, and then they look at how that the timing of this TV show. For instance, let's say The New Girl. If The New Girl is the topic that they're speaking about, they're going to look at it and talk about their favorite episodes, yes, and it's really funny and they're in conversation, but they're also going to relate it to other more important kind of current events and what's going on in the culture and why this TV show is happening at this time in the timeline of America or whatever. These things are really interesting. If you're interested in money and economics and business, Planet Money is a fantastic podcast. Even if you don't know anything about money, I liked listening to it because it was simple for me to understand. Now, as far as reading material goes, I highly recommend the New York Times as a number one go-to for looking at vocabulary and learning new vocabulary, but also at some really good writing. What some of those writers do, what I would have to write in 4 sentences, they can do in 1 sentence just because they'll use one vocabulary word that I would have to use 5 words to say. So it's really, really good reading. And if you're not reading the newspaper, either the physical newspaper or online pretty regularly, I highly encourage it, again, to stay knowledgeable about what's going on currently and to be able to apply what you're learning in your classes and to contribute to your classes with what's relevant for us. What's education if it's not relevant, right? All right, as far as information literacy goes in college, information literacy is one form of literacy that you have to build in order to be successful and finish and complete college. Information literacy is one. Literacy in general, like being able to read and critically think and analyze a reading. And then also technology, understanding how to use a computer or to upload or email. These are kinds of things that you need to be able to learn as you leave college. So information literacy is just the source of our information literacy here is the library. And the library holds all the information, right? It's kind of the heart of a college. So what becoming a master's student talks about on page 161 to 165 is researching, going to the library, how to use the library, different sources, what's the difference between an academic source and a non-academic source. So please read these pages because I'm briefly going to talk about them just to draw your attention to these important topics. So when we're doing a research paper or when we want to narrow our search, you will all have to do at least one research paper in college. So in order to narrow our topic so that we can find material, if we don't narrow a topic, we're going to get 5,000 hits of articles and websites and things that aren't relevant to what we're trying to use or research. So important to narrow our topic, but we don't want to go so narrow that we don't have any topics. So I suggest getting to know the research librarians and making friends with them. This is how I learned how to research really well. I knew the basics of researching from English, but the research librarians really taught me a lot on how to narrow my search, and there's a language that you can use so to make sure that you find the information you need. So becoming a master student will also talk about this, about using quotations in the search bar, using different symbols. And so learning that is really going to save you some time when it comes to researching, and it'll empower you as well. So the library has many sources of information, and a source is basically a document or something that holds information. So many different sources are present at the library. We have magazines and journals and ebooks and recordings, and the list goes on. So take a look at that in the library. And then please read in Becoming a Master Student the difference between academic sources and non-academic sources, and also be able to identify what a non-academic source is and an academic source. Okay, thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate it again and again and again. Thank you for sitting tight. And if you have any questions, you can email me. Thank you. Bye-bye.